of the existing stock. So we discussed that quite a bit this week.
I was going to say I was challenging my memory, then I was like, did we talk about that on the show today? Took a while to come through that message.
Alison, thank you. And also the passenger service between Auckland and Hamilton. Peter writes, good. It's $20 each way from Hamilton CBD to Auckland CBD, $40 return. Compared to a return car trip costing $100, the train is quicker than the car due to peak traffic issues in Auckland. So thank you for all your responses. Thank you to Amelia Langford for producing the show across the last couple of weeks, and a big thank you to Ella and Damien. You've been wonderful.
Kia ora, thank you as always.
Thank you very much. I'm Wallace Chapman and I'm back with you 3:45 Monday. Till then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, T-8 sleeps till V-Day of a different kind, the rollout of New Zealand's first COVID vaccinations. Who's front of the queue? Minister Chris Hipkins joins us. There's a snap 5-day lockdown in Victoria after COVID spreads after escaping hotel quarantine. Back here, Auckland hotels are limping through summer and the America's Cup has not boosted bookings. What's coming down Wellington's old clapped out pipes? Well, it looks like a big rates rise. Pour yourself a cold one, H2O that is. We talk drinking water around the Motu. And another injection, courtesy of the government, $55 million for public interest journalism.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The first batch of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine will arrive in New Zealand next week. Those first in line to receive the jabs are the country's 12,000 border workers who will be inoculated over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Nurses working at managed isolation and quarantine facilities will be part of that group. David Wills is the director of the Nurses Society, and he says today's announcement will bring relief to many.
Having a vaccine is certainly very welcome, and we expect the uptake to be essentially 100%.
The director of the Nurses Society, David Wills. The entire Australian state of Victoria will enter a 5-day coronavirus lockdown from tonight. A new cluster of cases has emerged this week, believed to have originated in a quarantine hotel in Melbourne. World Watch's Max Toll has more.
The cluster is still in the teens in terms of cases, but the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews says his health experts believe the virus is spreading at an unprecedented pace. He says a snap lockdown is necessary before the situation gets out of hand. Public gatherings, home auctions, weddings and religious events are now banned, and masks are mandatory in public. The Australian Open tennis tournament will continue, but without spectators. This is Max Toll.
Donald Trump's lawyers say they'll only present 3 hours of material in his defence at his impeachment trial, far fewer than the 16 they're allowed. They'll mount their case tomorrow in the US Senate, as our Washington correspondent Simon Marks reports.
Right after the Democrats rested their prosecution case against Donald Trump, the former president's lawyers met behind closed doors with Republicans who are supposed to be impartial jurors in the case. After the meeting, they announced they'll short-circuit this trial, offering just 3 hours of evidence in Donald Trump's defence, not the 16 hours they're allotted. The Republicans want this trial over as quickly as possible, and despite the mountainous evidence against Donald Trump, the stage is set for his acquittal.
Simon Marks reporting from Washington. Independent experts have been appointed to the government's rapid review into lead contamination in East Otago's drinking water. Waikuaiti and Karitane residents haven't been able to drink or cook with their tap water for the past 10 days. Today, Director General of Health Dr Ashley Bloomfield confirmed Dr Heather Ewins England and Dr Jill McKenzie would undertake the review into the health system response. He says they will analyse the water testing results, any recommendations and when and what information was passed on to the relevant authorities. A Waikato Maori ward councillor says local democracy excludes Maori far more than national democracy. A Parliament Select Committee is hearing public feedback on legislation which would uphold council decisions to establish Maori wards. Tipa Mahuta, who holds one of the 2 Maori seats on Waikato Regional Council, says establishing Maori wards would ensure greater representation.
As ratepayers, we can't get an audience to deal with long-standing water quality issues in rural communities. And they're meant to get equal service from my other councillors. But again, they're not communities of interest to them. So how will they represent them? But they're communities of interest to me.
Waikato Regional Councillor Tipa Mahuta. A Hamilton company that makes planes for skydiving and agriculture will be allowed to continue flying despite being insolvent. As part of the requirements of holding Civil Aviation Authority certificates, companies must be in a financial position to comply with safety requirements. The CAA says it has suspended Pacific Aerospace's certificates and is working with the industry to find another certificate holder. It says it is also working through the implications of the company's financial distress for its aircraft, which operate in New Zealand and around the world. It's 4 minutes past 5. Under-23 rider Finn Fisher-Black has outdone his more senior rivals in today's time trial at the National Road Cycling Championships in Cambridge. The 19-year-old World Tour development rider posted the fastest time on the 38.5 kilometre course, 9 seconds faster than elite men's division winner Aaron Gate. World Tour rider George Bennett was third fastest, less than a second behind Gate. In the women's race, Georgia Williams won her third national time trial title in 4 years. The All Blacks loose forward Ardie Savea is excited to lead a Hurricanes team full of Pasifika talent and honoured to represent his family and Samoan heritage. The 27-year-old will captain the Super Rugby team this year and says it's important Pasifika people are in top roles in society, but particularly in New Zealand rugby.
Last year it was about 70% of our team was Pasifika, so to be up here, man, I'm standing loud and proud to be Samoan, to be Kiwi, representing not only myself but my franchise, my brothers, my team, but more importantly my family, mum and dad and everyone back in Samoa and at home.
Ardie Savea. Team UK skipper Sir Ben Ainslie knows exactly what's on the line when the America's Cup Challenger Series final begins in Auckland tomorrow. The British take on Italian team Luna Rossa in the Best of 13 series, and Ainslie says they're fully focused on earning the right to race for the oldest trophy in sport.
We're all trying to make our mark in the history of the America's Cup, and we know that whichever team gets through to race Team New Zealand in the final, that's going to be a very, very special final.
Sir Ben Ainslie. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the North Korean ghost ships, which signal how the huge Chinese fishing fleet is ravaging the oceans. The extraordinary novel featuring a road trip with a dingo called Sue, which has won Australia's richest literary prize. And the Arkansas woman who cared for and secretly buried the victims of HIV/AIDS in the 1980s, when nobody else would. I'm Kim Hill. Join me tomorrow morning after 8 here on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to the Kapiti Coast, including Central High Country, also Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mostly fine weather. Isolated showers about Western Bay of Plenty and Coromandel tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy areas with isolated showers, mainly inland, becoming fine tomorrow. Wairarapa and Wellington, generally fine. Isolated showers clearing this evening. Marlborough and Nelson, fine apart from isolated showers inland this evening. Bulla and Westland fine, apart from some cloud tomorrow morning and evening. Canterbury, cloud with areas of drizzle, clearing this evening and becoming mainly fine. Isolated showers possible about the high country tonight and areas of cloud tomorrow morning. For Otago, Fiordland and Southland, mainly fine, cloudy or clouding over in Fiordland tonight with drizzle tomorrow. Chatham Islands, periods of rain, clearing tomorrow morning and becoming mainly fine. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A COVID jab could be a yearly thing and the government is already planning for that prospect, as our very first delivery of the Pfizer vaccine is less than a week away. The exact number of doses in that shipment is unknown, but best estimates are around 40,000. First in line are border workers, with the rollout expected to start next Saturday. It's a complicated vaccine. 2 shots are needed for maximum protection and it has to be stored stored at minus 70 degrees with a limited shelf life after that. COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins explains how far the first batch will go.
So we'll be able to get through our border workers, and we'll be able to make a start on their family members and their contacts, their close contacts.
Can you just confirm your strategy here? Are you going to give everybody 2 doses, or will you give as many people you can their first shot?
We are aiming to start rolling out to as many people as we can early on. We do need to make sure that we can give people the second dose of the same vaccine, but we know that we're getting 226,000 courses. So course basically means, both doses. That's what we'll be getting in the first quarter.
Sorry, I'm just not clear on that, Minister. So in the first instance, are you going to give everyone a single shot and do as many people as you can and then give them their follow-up shot when you have more stock?
Oh yeah, look, that's the limitation. We're not going to be limited by the availability of vaccines in terms of that at-risk workforce that we're trying to target early on. We'll be aiming to get to them as quickly as we can. The logistics will be the thing that holds us back there. Actually being able to reach them, being able to get to them, making sure that we can get them vaccinated as quickly as we can.
9 freezers you've got to store this stuff in. What's the maximum number of doses you can have at one time?
Oh, well more than the 226,000 we're expecting in the first quarter. And we are actually looking at additional freezer capability as well, so that as we, if we increase the number of doses of the Pfizer vaccine later on in the year, that we're prepared for that as well. But certainly we can store everything that we've ordered so far. We've got storage for.
Have you ordered more freezers, Minister?
We're in the process of looking at whether we'll get more freezers in the event that we choose to get, that we do end up getting more Pfizer vaccine, but those decisions haven't yet been taken.
So what's the minimum training level that vaccinators will have?
Well, for this early part of the vaccination campaign, we're using our existing vaccination workforce, which means they don't need to be trained on how to vaccinate. They get an additional sort of top-up training module that's specific to the Pfizer vaccine. That only takes a couple of hours for them to get that additional knowledge, because these are people who are well skilled at the art of vaccination.
So this is the 2-hour online course, Minister?
That's right, and so that's giving them the top-up knowledge they need that's specific to the Pfizer vaccine.
It's quite a complicated vaccine, right? You're getting multiple doses in a single vial. You need to draw down each particular dose, add something else. There's the temperature constraints. How are you managing quality control and auditing here?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we don't start vaccinating the minute the plane lands. There is a period of time where you have to separate out the vaccines. You have to quality check them to make sure they've been kept at the right temperature for the entire duration of their transport to New Zealand and to the cold store. So all of that takes a period of time. They then need to be broken down so that they can be distributed in smaller amounts. Now, that'll take us a little bit of time, which is why even though we are hoping to get the plane arriving early in the week, we've said that Saturday is when we'll kick off, because that just gives us that extra little bit of time to get all of that sorted out and underway. We have got enough supplies for this first shipment and for this early part, but internationally, supplies of the syringes and all of the things that go with it. There's a very competitive international market for that at the moment. We've got enough to get our campaign underway, but we've got more on order that's due to be arriving in the coming weeks.
So what coverage do we need for herd immunity in this country?
We haven't actually got a specific number on that, because it's going to depend to some extent on who gets what vaccines and how many of each vaccine we end up using. So we've got 4 different vaccines. They've got different effectiveness rates with different populations. And so, we're still in the process of approving the other 3 vaccines, and the trials and the medical data on those isn't yet fully in. So we can't really make that prediction at this point until we've got that extra information.
So could our herd immunity be compromised by the fact that we have a mix and match of vaccines?
No, not at all. One of the reasons that we bought a portfolio of vaccines is when we bought them, we didn't know how effective each of them would be, and so we wanted to make sure we've got options, and we absolutely do have options, so that we can make sure that we are administering the most effective vaccination campaign for New Zealand.
So how long before you know what that number is? Because it's critical, isn't it?
Likely to be in the second half of the year that we'll be able to do a bit more detailed modelling once we've gone through the approvals process for those other vaccines and made final decisions about who's getting which vaccine.
Who is going to be the very first person to be vaccinated? Have they been chosen?
I don't know that they've drawn straws as to who actually gets the shot on their arm first, but it will be there is a roster over a period of about 2 to 3 weeks to get through all of our border workers, and it will be on Saturday there will be people lining up. I haven't received that information as to exactly who the first person will be yet.
But they're not going to be random, are they, Minister? I'm sure there's going to be a huge amount of media attention. I'm assuming there will be a discussion and someone will be chosen to be the first person.
Oh, look, it will be a border worker, absolutely. It will be one of our cleaners or our nurses or our security personnel. They will be the first people getting it. And we'll certainly let you know as soon as we know who that's going to be.
In your vaccine strategy and planning, how often are you anticipating people will be need to be immunised against COVID?
That's still an uncertain quantity. We don't know how long the vaccines will be effective and how long it will be before people need a booster. And so that's we're again planning for every scenario there. So we are expecting, and I'm not sure we're necessarily expecting, but we're working on the basis that we may need to do the whole thing again next year. And so we're planning for that. It may not be that we have to do it next year, and then the effectiveness may be longer than that. But we're working on the basis that if we have to do it again next year, we should be ready for that.
That's a massive undertaking.
Well, yep, like I said, our flu vaccination campaign's been scaling up year on year. But yes, it would be a very big undertaking to have to do this every year. But at this point, the prudent thing to do is to plan for that eventuality. And then, of course, if we don't have to do it every year, if it turns out that the duration is longer than that, then that'll be a bonus.
On the issue of travel, this task force, Aussie-New Zealand task force that's been looking at a trans-Tasman bubble, right? We had Anne Sherry on this program who said they are aiming for the end of March to open up those channels. They're dreaming, aren't they, Minister?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. There's still quite a bit to work through. We have got some good protocols agreed between New Zealand and Australia as to what we would do in the event that there was an outbreak in either country. I guess one of the things that we need to understand a little bit more is what the Australian decision-making process around that would be. Certainly the Northland case that we dealt with a couple of weeks ago, had that happened in Australia, we would not have been closing off travel from Australia to New Zealand if the trans-Tasman bubble was operating. That was the decision that Australia took. So that's a risk that we need to understand more. So if a single case in New Zealand was going to close the border for New Zealanders travelling to Australia, we need to really understand that, because that has a big implication for how hard and how fast we move ahead with it.
OK, Minister, we just need to be really clear on this, because I imagine a few people have shuffled forward in their chairs listening to this at the vague prospect of travel outside of this country. So are you saying that the prospect of travel in a quarantine-free situation with Australia by the end of March is still on the cards, potentially?
Oh, it's certainly still a possibility, as it is with the Cook Islands as well.
How much of a possibility?
Look, it's a strong possibility, but like I said, we have to just be certain as to exactly what would happen in the event of an outbreak, either in New Zealand or Australia. The last thing that we want to have is tens of thousands of New Zealanders, and we would be talking about that kind of number. We'd be having 100 plus flights a week going either way across the Tasman. We'd need to be very certain about what would happen in the event of positive cases on either side of the Tasman, and both countries need to be absolutely sort of locked into that. Otherwise, it will create big headaches for either side in the event that we have to respond to either an outbreak or even just an isolated case.
And that is Minister Chris Hipkins. It's deja vu for the Australian state of Victoria, which will enter its third lockdown tonight for 5 days. A new cluster of cases has emerged from one of Melbourne's quarantine hotels, and they're being genomically linked to the UK variant of COVID-19. The Premier, Daniel Andrews, has described it as a short, sharp circuit breaker aimed at smothering the hyper-infectious variant.
We are having cases test positive, and we, in rapid time, we get notified of that positive test result. By the time we find that case as positive, they've already infected their close contacts, their family, people they live with, people they've spent time with. That makes it incredibly difficult to do contact tracing, because there is no gap, if you like, between when we have the first case and their close contacts and potentially others that they have spent time with. The whole process, because of the hyper-infectivity and the speed at which this UK variant moves, the whole process has been condensed down, and it is now, I am sad to have to report, it is the advice to me that we must assume that there are further cases in the community than we have positive results for, and that it is moving at a velocity that has not been seen anywhere in our country over the course of these last 12 months.
Joining me now is 7 News reporter in Melbourne, Laurel Irving. Laurel, thanks for joining us. Why have they opted for such a short, sharp lockdown here?
Hi, Lisa. Well, it's a number of factors. Firstly, that they thought they pretty much had it under control, but then they realised that one of the close contacts of an infected worker at that quarantine hotel had actually been working at a takeaway coffee shop at the airport all day while they believe that person was infectious. And so now they think that there might be as many as 4,000 or 5,000 people who've come into contact with that person who've now since flown around the country or are going through Victoria. And so it was that case in particular, but also the realisation that the incubation period for this UK strain is much shorter. So before we were dealing with an incubation period of an average of 6 to 10 days before a person would be considered infectious. Now it's much quicker, as you just heard our Premier say. So what they're hoping to do is do a short, sharp shutdown and then be able to test as many people as possible that perhaps have come into contact with any of these cases. And the hope is that anybody who comes back negative will already be in isolation, but they basically want to stop that virus moving around the community. They hope they've jumped on it in time before the third wave. So Melbourne, as you know, last year defeated our second wave. It was utterly brutal, but we got there. And what they want to make sure this time is that we stop a third wave. So the hope is that this is something of a preventative measure.
So what do the restrictions mean in kind of practical terms?
Well, it's everything that we had last year almost. We've gone back to not being able to leave our homes except for the 4 reasons that you guys are very familiar with too, the shopping, essential work, caring for someone. You can go out for 2 hours of exercise a day. You're not allowed to go more than 5Ks from your home. Schools have been shut down, gyms, pools, libraries closed. All visits are banned in aged care centres and hospitals. So it's all non-essential. Shops have been shut. All cafes and restaurants will be limited to takeaways only, and that takes place from midnight tonight. So it is those really tough stage 4 restrictions that we had last year. The only silver lining is that at least the playgrounds stay open this time and we don't have that 8 p.m. curfew. But apart from that, it's pretty tough.
Have they definitively determined how that first person got infected?
No, they're working on the assumption that somebody who had COVID and brought it back from overseas was using a nebulizer for it. It's like I'm not sure if you know what a nebulizer is.
For asthma, yeah.
They put it in, for asthma. So the working assumption, although they've yet to prove it definitively, is that nebulizer was being used against the rules, I might add, but that nebulizer was being used by someone who had COVID, and that has spread those teeny tiny particles out into the corridor and then out to other rooms. And so you've seen other residents of hotel quarantine get it. You've also seen staff members get it, but now, of course, we're seeing their household contacts get it as well, and it's just moving so quickly, they're pretty worried about it.
So why a statewide lockdown? Because it seems like Melbourne is the heart of this problem.
Yes, because it's really hard with such a short period of time to put in place the physical infrastructure basically to separate Melbourne from the rest of regional Victoria. So last time at the height of the second wave, we had what we call the Ring of Steel. So on all the major highways out of Melbourne, you had a massive police roadblock. Every car was pulled over. You had to prove that you had a good reason for going into regional Victoria for one of the essential reasons. And that just can't be put up in the space of a couple of hours. That takes hundreds and hundreds of police officers and, of course, the physical infrastructure as well, the barriers. So that just can't be done. And for the sake of 5 days, the Premier said, look, it is just easier. And obviously to make sure it doesn't get out into regional Victoria, just easier to make it a statewide thing. So clearly everybody is bitterly disappointed. You know, there'll be weddings that have been planned for tomorrow that have been cancelled. Valentine's Day on Sunday, which would have meant not only massive business for florists, of course, it's one of their biggest days of the year, but also people going out for dinner. We know our hospitality industry has been absolutely battered over the past 12 months, and this is another huge setback for them. So it's really, really hard, but the Premier's adamant that we need to do this to stop a third wave happening.
It's going to be interesting, isn't it? Because it's late notice, and as you mentioned, there's potentially people who've got big events organised, and this is the third time round. So how compliant are people going to be?
Oh, look, I know what you mean. The sense of frustration is high, but we also know, I think we know what it takes. And I think everybody does want to make sure there's not a longer lockdown. And we know that police will be out. Look, Australians have shown time and time and time again that they will pretty much comply with these orders that are in place. We basically just suck it up now and do it and accept that it's, you know, us, like New Zealand, it's working. We have a very low number of cases in comparison to the rest of the world. So certainly nobody's happy. There's a lot of frustration. There's in particular a lot of frustration that, again, we've had this problem of a case escaping from hotel quarantine has forced Victoria into lockdown. That's obviously a big political debate here, but I think most Victorians will probably, based on past experience, just get on with it for the sake of 5 days.
So, hey, what does this mean for the Australian Open then?
Yeah, it's been a big thing. It was certainly a big thing at the press conference. It will still go ahead, so that's considered, basically that's their workplace, but there'll be no crowds. So the crowds will be able to go to the tennis tonight, although I wouldn't be surprised if those crowd numbers are well down. But as soon as that last match finishes tonight, there'll be no more crowds for the next 5 days. But the tournament will continue. That's considered the athlete's workplace. That will go ahead, just not considered an entertainment option. So crowds won't be able to go.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is 7 News reporter Laurel Irving, who's joining us there from Melbourne. And there is a snap lockdown, five days, starting from basically just before midnight tonight, their time. It is 25 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Still to come on the program, we'll look at how the vaccination plan will work for the rest of the population here in New Zealand. We are keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Dunedin City Council is still hunting for the source of the lead contamination in East Otago and has started a $6 million project to replace 5 kilometres of old pipes. The latest test results show lead levels are below acceptable levels, but it's been 10 days since communities in the area were told to stop drinking tap water, and it's not clear when spikes in lead concentration started. Earlier this week, we spoke to Water New Zealand Technical Manager Noel Roberts, who told us there are a number of ticking time bombs around the country. He also admitted there are some places where he wouldn't drink the tap water. So has this issue put the frighteners up other districts to make sure they don't have any potential disasters coming down the pipes? This murky business of Otago water contamination may have some of you eyeing your kitchen tap with a newfound suspicion. And the drip, drip, drip of information has led to a well of questions, not just about Otago, but water everywhere. So Checkpoint decided to check in with a few districts and cities. Thames Coromandel Mayor Sandra Gowdy kindly pulls over roadside to answer our questions. There's a water bottle in the car with what she describes as a few stale gulps of H2O remaining. On a scale of yuck to absolutely yummo, can you rate the H2O in your district, please?
Oh, yeah, no, I'm happy with the water. I would say it's excellent. Of course I'd say it's excellent. I'd say it's pretty good on the whole.
Yeah, so can you describe it to us? You know, let's imagine this was a fine vintage. Is the water clear? Does it have any smell? Is it, got any particular taste?
Cool, clear and thirst quenching. It's just manna from heaven.
Really? Because, and the reason I ask this is, The most recent annual report on drinking water quality from the Ministry of Health, your district is a bit of a stinker if you look through some of the results in that report. Non-compliant in various areas, haven't met certain standards. I'm wondering why that's the case.
Well, you're immediately deemed non-compliant if you miss one of the testing regimes, which is done every few minutes, and if you miss one of those, you're then deemed non-complying. So it's a test sampling system that exists where it's done so minutely, one could say, that if you do miss an instant, then you're deemed non-compliant, and that's it.
But
so it's just the test timing.
Shouldn't it be strict, though? Because people are consuming this stuff all day, every day.
Well, they are, but to that degree, I would say no.
Should people in your district have any worries about the quality of your water?
I don't think so.
But maintaining crystal blue costs a lot of gold. The Mayor again.
In terms of the spending to renew, that takes a lot. So currently we spend about 11 million per year to run our drinking water operations, our water supply operations, and asset management planning and ongoing inspections and assessments and indications for upgrade. That's also ongoing, and we're in year 2 of a year 3 drinking water treatment project, and that's about an $18 million project.
But here's the thing. The Thames Coromandel District Council only supplies water to about 40% of people in its catchment.
The remaining 60% is private supply. So there are a lot of people that rely on roof water tank systems or local takes.
And there'd be some pretty interesting roof collection arrangements, I would imagine.
Look, I wouldn't even want to envisage it, and we've got no authority or responsibility for that, thank goodness. But if there was a requirement to take that on and have authority for that, it would be a fiscal nightmare.
Since the Otago lead contamination scare surfaced, there's been a steady flow of feedback from some of our listeners about the H2O in their town. Not all of it complimentary.
Hello, Jane speaking.
That's Jane from Martin, where the drinking water is apparently sometimes mighty whiffy.
When it hasn't rained for a long time, it's got a really strong smell. You can smell it from a couple of metres away when you put on the shower or the tap, and you can't drink it. I know that sounds, you just can't. It's okay in coffee if you have strong coffee, but in a cup of tea it's really strong. If it's filtered through the council filter, it is drinkable in a cup of tea, but it's still not that great.
How far away could you get a whiff of this water, Jane, when it's not great?
Oh, when I first shifted to Martin at the end of 2019, I hunted round wondering where the smell was coming from, and it turned out to be coming out of the shower nozzle.
What does it look like? Does it look like just normal water?
Yes, it looks just like normal water.
Taste-wise, though?
It's a 2 out of 10.
Now, that rates a chat with the Rangitikei District Council, but maybe not a cuppa. Sadly, no one was available to talk to Checkpoint, but we did get a statement saying the district's drinking water complies with New Zealand standards and is safe to drink. And then this bit.
The water source for the Martin drinking water supply is water captured in 2 dams, exposed to the environment, including weather. During the warmer summer months, the dams are subject to algae blooms that in turn cause taste and odour challenges in the town water supply. The water is still safe to drink, although we acknowledge there can be an unpleasant taste and odour for our residents. We are currently looking at a long-term solution for the problem.
Rangitikei District Council says it's watching the Otago situation closely and will adapt its water monitoring regime if need be. Let's head north where Tatiana Deravienko is Watercare's Principal Water Quality Scientist. A big title for a big job in our biggest city.
We serve in about 1.7 million of our customers, and we supply in about 420 cubic millions of litres a day. We have sampling points across our treatment plants and distribution zone locations. To be exact, we have about 550 sampling points around our network.
So, Tatiana, on any given day, can you just give us an idea of how many tests that might be?
On any given day, we will collect probably 200, 300 tests daily from our source treatment and network.
And what are you testing for?
The most common one would be E. coli and chlorine in our water, also turbidity, its clarity of the water, and pH of the water to ensure that our chlorine is efficient.
Watercare posts its results online in alphabet soup of unpronounceable potential contaminants and numbers. But bottom line, Watercare says Auckland's drinking water scores an A grade. There's no requirement in the Health Act to regularly test for lead or other heavy metals in drinking water, but Watercare does.
We go over and above what's required in the drinking water standards, and this is the way we operate. We go over and above.
How much lead is in water in Auckland?
Watercare tests for metals, including lead, at all our water treatment plants, sources, and throughout the network. All our test results confirm that there are no concerns to public health, and levels of lead in our water supply are well below levels specified in drinking water standards and international guidelines.
Down in Otago, Dunedin City Council's racing to rip up and replace about 5 kilometres of water pipes with lead joins at a cost of $6 million. Watercare's responsible for 8,000 kilometres of pipes. So just to be clear, Tatiana, do you still have pipes in the Auckland system that would have lead joins in them?
There are no lead pipes in Watercare network, and a small amount of lead-jointed cast iron pipes in the older areas of central Auckland is minimal to have any adverse effect on water quality.
Do you drink water from the tap?
I drink it and I like it, Lisa. I drink water only out of the tap, and I feel my children drink bottles out of the tap, and I did not have any concerns. And my children are very proud that Mum is looking after water quality for 1.7 million people in Auckland region.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, we have reaction to New Zealand's COVID vaccine rollout. We're getting around 40,000 doses first off, but across the ditch, Australia plans to manufacture 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca jab every week. And a senior teacher is sprung spreading COVID-19 conspiracy theories. We'd love your feedback. Don't forget you can get in touch via text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
It's feared a new COVID-19 cluster in Melbourne could spread at an unprecedented rate. The entire state of Victoria will enter a 5-day coronavirus lockdown from tonight in response. A new cluster of cases has emerged this week, believed to have originated in a quarantine hotel in Melbourne. The first batch of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine will arrive in New Zealand next week. Those first in line to receive the jabs are the country's 12,000 border workers, who will be inoculated over the next 2 to 3 weeks. The COVID response minister told Checkpoint it will require a degree of planning to roll out the first vaccine in the next few weeks. The Education Ministry has reacted swiftly after a senior teacher sent COVID-19 conspiracy theories to at least 40 principals and teachers. The teacher's email included allegations about 5G, the deep state and Bill Gates. The ministry says it contacted the chair of the board of the man's school as soon as it was alerted to his email. A breast cancer survivor has told a hui designed to tackle the appalling rates of cancer among Maori that her caregivers struggled to even get her name correct. Waitara woman Wharekuka Tongawhiko spoke at our Cancer Society Cancer Control Agency meeting in New Plymouth today. She says although her care was excellent when she was diagnosed 12 years ago, there was nothing that recognised her as Maori. Auckland Council says nearly 100 juvenile eels have been found dead in a stream near an industrial spill yesterday in Penrose. Approximately 5,000 litres of methyl methacrylate was released from storage at the specialist chemical business Alnex. It went into the stormwater drain and then the Manukau Harbour. Water is being tested and people are being warned not to swim or go into the water over the weekend as a precaution. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Welcome back. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to some traffic news now. A crash is blocking the right northbound lane on Auckland's southern motorway just before the Regan Road overbridge in Manukau. People are asked to pass the scene with care and expect delays. Well, it's time for the business news now, and just like magic, Giles Beckford is joining us from our Wellington studio. Hi, Giles. What's the chat around? Hello. What's the chat around the ANZ and its credit card insurance?
It's really coming into the end game of this. The Financial Markets Authority was told by ANZ a wee while ago there'd been certain discrepancies in the way that ANZ had been selling credit card insurance. Now, this is for those who wanted to ensure that if they missed a payment, that they were covered. Now, it goes back to 2014 and only affected a few hundred people. But the breaches of the Financial Markets Conduct Act were that ANZ sold policies to people that weren't eligible for them, but it charged them for them anyway. And it sold policies that really did nothing for people, offered them no benefit whatsoever. Now, of course, these are the sort of issues that were at the key to some of the big banking scandals and financial market scandals in Australia, which prompted, of course, the Royal Commission there. So I think the Financial Markets Authority wanted to make a point. It took the issue to the High Court, the first time that it's done so, and used as part of its act. The ANZ's put up its hands and said, yes, we got it wrong. It's now put up its hands in court. So there's a legal precedent now being established. The money involved has been repaid to the customers affected. They've received apologies from ANZ, but it's up to the court now to decide on a penalty. The FMA does want to see and has asked for a penalty up to $280,000. Small beer in the scheme of things for ANZ, but probably quite an important little consumer precedent has been established.
Giles, Air New Zealand's been in the headlines a bit lately, so when it comes to selling more shares mid-year to raise new capital, is the New Zealand public and the government still going to be the major shareholder there?
We are 52% shareholders through the government, and the government's given just a very brief letter. It had always stated it would back the airline in any share issue, but it's now given it the formal undertaking that it will maintain that 52% shareholding when the airline sells new shares. We'll get some more details on that probably in a week or two, and that will happen towards the middle of the year. We don't know the size yet, but we can bet that share sale will be hundreds of millions of dollars. I wouldn't be surprised to see it possibly go as high as over $1 billion. But in any event, the government's made quite an important point saying there'll be no privatisation by stealth. We won't just try and avoid our responsibilities. It's a national airline. We'll maintain that 52% stake. And that gives confidence, I think, to outside investors who might be wondering, well, it's an airline that's it's in powerless condition and its prospects don't look that great for the next year or three. So it will give confidence to people to invest in that share float when it occurs.
Giles, do we think that that kind of flexi loan facility that the government set up for Air New Zealand, that it will take payment for that in shares?
They could possibly, although it might get a little bit too complicated to try and say, well, we'll take shares here. There was a provision in that agreement for the loan to be converted into shares. I suspect the airline might like to just sort of say, look, here's the money we've borrowed so far, pay it back, and the government stumps up its, whatever it is, millions of dollars for another bunch of shares. But, all things are possible. The bankers, of course, they can just work these things as it suits. We'll wait and see, but, it will be what is the simplest way of achieving that.
OK, let's take a quick trot around the markets before you head off.
Well, the share market, it hasn't been able to buy a trick this week. It's 4 days trading, 4 days of losses. Today was the heaviest, down 171 points. That's about 1.3%. The market's lost about 3.5% so far this week. A bit of positioning there, we think, just ahead of the earnings season. We'll be seeing company half-year reports from Monday. First cab off the rank will be Contact Energy. And we should note that some of the bigger losers today were the energy companies. So the top 50 index, as I say, down 1.3%. New Zealand dollar, 72.1 US cents, 93.2 Australian, 52.3 British pence. And if you're still hankering about Bitcoin, and you probably aren't, but 65,700 New Zealand dollars is what a Bitcoin is worth at the moment.
Thanks, Giles. Giles Beckford with our business news there. And in news just to hand, there's been a 4.9 magnitude earthquake near Waverley in South Taranaki. GeoNet says it happened just before 5 this evening at a depth of 120 kilometres. Just to repeat that, a 4.9 magnitude earthquake near Waverley in South Taranaki. And GeoNet says that was around 5 this evening. The depth of that quake is at about 120 kilometres. We'll bring you more details as they come to hand. Wellington residents are expecting to feel a pinch in their pockets after it was revealed the council is looking at introducing a rates rise of up to 17%. It comes as the city faces a trifecta of issues: earthquake-prone buildings, failing water pipes and an outdated transport system. Our reporter Harry Locke and camera operator Samuel Rillstone went out to see what Wellingtonians make of it all.
$2.7 billion over 10 years will go into upgrading and improving the city's constantly bursting and failing water pipes. To pay for it, the council is now considering up to a whopping 17% rates increase. Wellington resident Luke says he's torn.
Yes, I mean, that stuff needs to be done at some point, but it's when you think about these things, ultimately a lot of people are thinking about like, well, I'm a renter, we're trying to save, we've got, a couple of young kids, we're trying to get ahead, and so it's hard to see how those things affect me directly, but I definitely feel the effect on, that's more money going out of my pocket and makes it harder for me to achieve our goals as a family.
So why are rates going up so highly? It's not just the city's water woes. There's also the financial impact the pandemic has had on council finances as well. Loss of income through services and dividends has been particularly impacted.
And then that doesn't even take into account the huge money that's going into strengthening some of the city's most beloved buildings. Take, for example, the Central Library behind me is costing $180 million alone.
And just across the square, the strengthening of the town hall is going to cost more than $110 million. Chloe, who has only lived in Wellington since August, is empathetic to just what the council is having to deal with. But she would rather the money didn't come from ratepayers.
Definitely from a personal perspective. But equally, I hope they've explored all avenues and not just thought immediately of ratepayers. But if that's the only option, then I guess that's what they've got to do.
The Mayor has suggested increasing the council's borrowing limit, because pipes and buildings is not all the council is contending with. The other big money spender is transport. They're co-funding the $6 billion plus Let's Get Wellington Moving programme. A highly critical review of that programme, undertaken last year and published today, has found it's at risk of failure, has a detrimental culture and has been consistently under-resourced. Mahi Tangare, a board member of the city's Chamber of Commerce, says they will be looking intently into exactly where the money is going.
I don't think you can live in this city and not appreciate what it needs. We are all desperate to have things better. We just want to make sure that the money that they're going to get is actually going to be targeted at the areas that we really need it.
But she's worried what a big rates rise could do for some of the city's businesses.
I don't think that any rates increase comes easily, and building owners bear a lot of the brunt, and they will have to pass it on to their tenants. Retailers struggling. Some types of business will not survive, I believe, in the next 6 to 12 months.
So with Wellington now looking at an increase somewhere between 14 and 17%, what does that mean for other councils? Will residents of other cities and towns be fearing a similar increase in rates? President of Local Government New Zealand, Stuart Crosby, says he doesn't think so.
Not in the high teens. I think
Williams reports hoteliers are urging the government to do more to help them survive.
In the heart of Auckland's theatre district, Airedale boutique suites would, in normal times, be bustling with summer guests. Sitting opposite the town hall, the hotels had a $25 million refurbishment. But Senate Group Managing Director Brendan Taylor says only a fifth of the rooms are booked.
The issue, I suppose, that we have is that we have quarantine hotels all around us, and it's part of the town that is actually very, very quiet.
He says most of the hotel's guests are corporate travellers and there have been no local visitors staying for the America's Cup. Prices are falling too. Average room rates in the city dropped $22 a night in January.
The biggest issue we have now in the CBD is that because you're getting all these new hotels opening with no business, is that the average yields and rates are getting pretty low. So I think at the end of the day, everybody's going to be running around being fools and nobody's going to make any money.
Despite its hotel in the hard-hit West Coast town Fox Glacier sitting almost empty, Mr Taylor says the hotel group will get through, as some of its 17 hotels buoy those lesser performing. Figures from the hotel data program show the number of rooms booked in Auckland's hotels fell steeply to 45.8% in January, compared with over 80% last year. That's excluding MIQ facilities, which account for almost a third of hotels in the city. The Hotel Council Aotearoa represents over half of the country's hotels. Its strategic director James Doolan says even at half occupancy, most would struggle to make a profit.
We act for a number of different hotel owners, operators, GMs who are all vigorously competing with each other for the customers that remain. So no one's telling me exactly how close they are to the precipice.
He says it's extraordinarily challenging because hotels have ongoing costs and will soon face the shoulder season, the bit between peak and off-peak.
Not very many hotels have had very good results, and some hotels have had tragic results. We're starting to move into what are traditionally the slow and quiet months for New Zealand when the weather gets a little bit worse. There's no school holidays.
Stats NZ figures show the accommodation and food service sectors shed close to 8,000 jobs last year. Auckland Business Association, heart of the city, is helping to market events in the city and staycations to locals and visitors. Chief Executive Viv Beck says figures show more local visitors stayed in hotels in the last 3 months of 2020 compared to the year before, but it didn't make up for the loss of international visitors.
There are people who are taking advantage of being able to come and stay in a beautiful hotel. But as I said at the start, it's quite lumpy, and we've got to basically pull every lever we can at the moment to try and attract people in.
As it approaches the shoulder season, the Hotel Council is urging the government to ensure they're still operating when borders reopen. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
Just a bit of housekeeping. If you were listening to Harry Locke's piece and Samuel Rillstone's piece, which was on Wellington and the potential big rates rise that is coming there. Sorry, we had a little bit of a technical hitch, but it will go up online. It's got a great video that goes with it. Do check out there that story and you'll get to hear the end. It is 9 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, border workers will be first in line for the Pfizer vaccine. We look at how and when it'll happen for everyone else. The Education Ministry has reacted swiftly after a senior teacher sent COVID-19 conspiracy theories to at least 40 principals and teachers. The man emailed a PDF including various allegations and claimed teachers could soon lose their jobs over issues of free speech. The ministry says it contacted the chair of the school's board as soon as it heard about the email. Joining me now is our education correspondent, John Gerritsen. John, in general terms, what was in this message?
Okay, well, Lisa, this is a message sent from a private email. The man addressed it to fellow New Zealand educators. And as you say, he said freedom of speech is being being curbed around issues related to the pandemic, and he warned that a time's coming when teachers might lose their jobs. Now, the PDF itself that he attached to the message is a book by an American, which apparently has been pulled from sale on Amazon. And I won't go into great detail, but broadly the conclusions are that the 5G could be used to make people sick, creating an illusion of a pandemic, allowing a compulsory vaccination program where people will be electronically tagged, and it's all a big plan by the deep state and Bill Gates. So there you have it.
So what has been the official reaction to this?
Well, look, the Education Ministry just said it's got in contact with the chair of the board of the Man's School as soon as it became aware. Now, it wouldn't tell me what it told the board chair, but the ministry says it doesn't agree with the content of the teacher's message. It says it's been at pains to help principals and teachers get accurate information about the pandemic, and clearly, it's worried here because schools are very critical for dealing with the pandemic. They're supposed to take seriously their responsibility to observe lockdowns, to do contact tracing, maintaining hygiene. So it's clear they're not happy that you've got senior staff who may not be taking those things seriously.
And so, what's been the reaction from other teachers?
Well, the few I've talked to me pretty shocked. I mean, one of the recipients of this message said it was just unacceptable. It gave them chills, and they were worried that it was just too easy for this person to directly email them the stuff. Now, I sent this on to another principal whose reaction was just, whoa, and they declined to comment. They said, look, I just don't want to give any airtime to this sort of stuff. But also went to the Teachers' Council and said, look, have you had any complaints about teachers sharing this sort of information? They said they hadn't, and other principals said they had not come across this issue before of teachers sharing this sort of information.
And just briefly, has this teacher had anything to say for himself?
Yeah, look, I haven't managed to speak with him. He initially emailed me to say, look, he's not in a position to discuss the contents of the book. It's up to individual to judge its merit. But look, later he emailed me and said he strongly regrets sending the information and he won't be commenting further.
Thanks for that, John. That is John Gerritsen, our education correspondent. The Duchess of Sussex has won her 2-year legal battle with a British tabloid newspaper over the publication of a letter she wrote to her estranged father after her wedding. The High Court ruled that Meghan Markle had a reasonable expectation the letter would remain private. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell has more.
This is a significant victory for the Duchess of Sussex. Meghan, strongly supported by her husband, Prince Harry, has shown herself to be absolutely determined, robustly to defend her right to privacy. This case began after the Mail on Sunday published lengthy extracts from a letter she'd written in late 2018 to her estranged father, Thomas.
Meghan's lawyers had told the High Court that the letter was a heartfelt plea from an anguished daughter. They'd applied for something called a summary judgment. That's a judgment without a full trial, on the basis, they said, that the Mail on Sunday had no real prospect of success. And the judge agreed.
Mr. Justice Warby examined the evidence and found, taken as a whole, the disclosures published by the newspaper were manifestly excessive and hence unlawful. There is no prospect that a different judgment would be reached after a trial, he said. Meghan has also won on the separate issue of copyright infringement, but privacy is the one that really counts. In a statement, she spoke about what she said were the tactics of the Mail Group's newspapers. For these outlets, it's a game, she said. For me and so many others, it's real life, real relationships, and very real sadness. The damage they have done and continue to do runs deep. The Mail on Sunday's publishers said they were very surprised by the judgment. They said they would decide in due course whether to lodge an appeal.
That report from the BBC's Nicholas Witchell. It's not easy to qualify for the Olympics at the best of times, but the global pandemic has made the job even harder. Many international qualifying events have been cancelled, robbing athletes of the chance to represent their nation in Tokyo later this year. In Australia, the Olympic Committee is aiming to take more than 400 athletes to the game, but only 78 have qualified for the team so far. The ABC's Daniel Miles reports.
On a picturesque farm in Victoria's southwest, an Olympian is hard at work. Bunkered down a safe distance from the dairy cows on her parents' farm in Buka, clay target shooter Penny Smith is getting her own.
Yeah, it's been quite nice actually. Sort of like to be away from everyone and know that I can come out the back door and have my own shooting range on my property has been really good.
But she's one of the lucky ones. Her training's continued unhindered by the pandemic, and Penny Smith is one of the few Australians to have already qualified for the national side. Hundreds of her fellow athletes have had their training schedules interrupted while they wait for international competitions to resume and qualification matches to restart.
Couldn't think what they're going through. It certainly would be very stressful and a lot of pressure, not knowing sort of where their matches may be or how they're going to qualify.
Table tennis player Millie Tapper has seen the rhythm of her training routine disrupted. The 30-year-old rewrote the record books at Rio in 2016 and became the first athlete to represent Australia at both the Olympic and Paralympic Games. But right now, she's still waiting to secure an Olympic berth.
So I'm aiming to qualify in the team event and the mixed doubles event. So that will be through a qualification tournament, which we're not sure when will be held.
Japan's currently experiencing a third wave of coronavirus infections, with the International Olympic Committee's grappling with how to make qualifying fair for locked-down nations. Only 78 Australian athletes have won a spot in the nation's Olympic team to date, nearly half of which will be competing at their first Games. But the Victorian Institute of Sport's performance manager, Bill Tate, thinks the pandemic could work in the team's favour.
I would say we should be optimistic in Australia. If we have a really good run as we are at the moment in terms of relative safety from COVID and ability to train, we should be at an advantage compared to some of our Northern Hemisphere competitors.
It's a long way to Tokyo from the back paddock in Buka. Population 163, the town boasts more cows than residents. But as Penny Smith points out, it's also the home of one of Australia's most famous equestrian families that, for generations, dominated Olympic equestrian events, bringing home gold.
The Roycroft family, they come from Buka, so a little bit of history around Buka with the Olympics, so it's good.
And something worth aiming for.
A few of you have been asking about water testing. This is in relation to our earlier report. You can check out the results online at the Ministry of Health.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The Victorian Government says a 5-day snap lockdown is necessary to assess the extent of a new outbreak of COVID-19. From tonight, the entire state will enter a strict lockdown after a cluster of cases linked to a Melbourne quarantine hotel. Victoria's Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, says the cases have been linked to the UK strain of the virus.
It is significantly more infectious than any other virus that we've seen previously. And we're seeing this play out in the cases that we've had in this cluster of cases.
The Australian Open tennis tournament will continue, but without spectators. The COVID response minister admits it will require a degree of planning to roll out the first COVID-19 vaccine in the next few weeks. MIQ and border workers in Auckland will be offered the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine in the first instance. They will also require a second shot. Chris Hipkins says it could be tricky.
The logistics will be the thing that holds us back there, actually being able to reach them, being able to get to them, making sure that we can get them vaccinated as quickly as we can.
COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins. The Education Ministry has reacted swiftly after a senior teacher sent COVID-19 conspiracy theories to at least 40 principals and teachers. The teacher's email included allegations about 5G, the deep state and Bill Gates. The ministry says it contacted the chair of the board of the man's school as soon as it was alerted to his email. The board chair did not respond to RNZ's request for comment, and the teacher has refused to talk to RNZ, saying in an email his only comment is that he now strongly regrets sending it. The Democrats have finished presenting their case against Donald Trump, arguing he incited the deadly siege at the Capitol building in Washington on January the 6th. Impeachment manager Joe Neguse appealed to the senators deciding the case by humbly asking them to convict Donald Trump.
If we pretend this didn't happen, or worse, if we let it go unanswered, who's to say it won't happen again?
Democrats impeachment manager Joe Neguse. Mr Trump has refused the chance to testify himself, and his legal team say they will need only 3 hours rather than the allocated 16 hours to mount his defence case. The Cancer Control Agency, which kicked off a series of nationwide hui in New Plymouth today, says they are an important first step to addressing the appalling cancer statistics for Maori. Maori are 20% more likely to develop cancer and twice as likely as non-Maori to die from it. Te Aho Te Kahu's Director for Person Whānau-Centred Care, Fletcher Beasley, says for too long Maori have been suffering disproportionately from cancer. He says the 15 hui will allow the voice of whānau Māori to be heard. Wellington police have filed further charges after a months-long investigation into an alleged local drug dealing syndicate importing and distributing drugs. A 34-year-old Wellington man who was already facing charges in relation to the supply of the Class B drug GBL has been charged with 8 further counts of importing the drug. The police say the imports equate to about 400,000 street-level doses of the drug. The man is due to reappear in the Wellington District Court next week and is also charged with manufacturing methamphetamine. The family of the Saudi women's rights activist Lujain al-Hathlouth says she will seek to bring to justice those she accuses of torturing her in prison. Ms. Hathlouth, who campaigned to win women the right to drive, was released from prison yesterday. Her family has said that during her nearly 3 years in jail, she was subjected to electric shocks, whippings and sexual harassment. The Saudi authorities deny this. France has abandoned plans for a huge new terminal at Charles de Gaulle Airport outside Paris due to the pandemic. It also blames changing environmental priorities. The BBC's Hugh Schofield with this report.
Terminal 4 was described as an airport within an airport. By the end of the 2030s, it was projected to handle 450 extra flights at the airport every day and 40 million extra passengers every year. But since approval, 2 things have happened. First, in order to respect carbon emission targets, the government radically changed its transport priorities and now says any airport development must include plans for the electric and hydrogen-fueled planes of the future. The second change, of course, is COVID. With air traffic today just a quarter of its pre-crisis levels, mammoth expansion schemes like Terminal 4 appear distinctly irrelevant.
Hugh Schofield reporting. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The Australian Open tennis tournament will continue without crowds for 5 days after the state of Victoria was placed under a snap lockdown to contain a fresh outbreak of COVID-19. Crowds at the event have so far been limited to just 30% capacity. On court, 23-time Grand Slam champ Serena Williams is through to the third round after a straight sets win over Russia's Anastasia Potapova. New Zealand's Michael Venus and Australian doubles partner John Peers are also through to the third round. Top seed Novak Djokovic plays tonight, while third seed Dominic Thiem faces colourful Australian Nick Kyrgios. Luna Rossa are focused on themselves ahead of the America's Cup Challenger Series final beginning in Auckland tomorrow. The Italians will race Team UK in the best of 13 series for all of their recon on the opposition. Luna Rossa skipper Max Serena says they're looking internally to get the right result.
The real enemy is ourselves. Is no actually Ineos or Ben, and we need to sail well against ourselves first.
Max Serena. The Breakers basketball coach Dan Shamir concedes they need a little luck to get their Australian NBL season going. Ahead of tonight's game against the Kings in Sydney, the New Zealanders sit last in the standings after 4 games. Shamir says the team is close to finding the winning formula.
We are waiting for a breakthrough game. A lot of simple things are not going in our way. We're doing the work and preparing for every game and everything that needs to be done. And sometimes you just need to catch a little bit of a momentum.
Tip-off tonight is at 9:30. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life ends the week on a high with a visit to the mainland hemp farm in North Canterbury. Cello player, taonga pōroro specialist, music therapist and composer Ruby Solly selects a mixtape. And because we are talking to the organisers of the Paikakariki vinyl record sale after 8, we've got a Sonic Tonic dedicated to things old school on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to the Kapiti Coast, including central high country, also Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mostly fine. Isolated showers about Western Bay of Plenty and Coromandel tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy areas with isolated showers mainly inland, becoming fine tomorrow. Wairarapa and Wellington, generally fine. Isolated showers clearing this evening. Marlborough and Nelson, fine apart from isolated showers inland tonight. Bulla and Westland, fine, apart from some cloud tomorrow morning and evening. For Canterbury, cloud with areas of drizzle clearing this evening and becoming mainly fine. Isolated showers possible about the high country tonight and areas of cloud tomorrow morning. For Otago, Fiordland and Southland, mainly fine. Clouding over in Fiordland this evening with drizzle tomorrow. Chatham Islands, periods of rain clearing tomorrow morning and becoming mainly fine. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The arrival of the country's first COVID vaccine has been hailed as a landmark day for the country. The first doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine are due to arrive next week, earlier than first signalled by the government. Border workers are first in line, while a big logistical challenge lies ahead to vaccinate the rest of the population. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
The 12,000 New Zealanders most at risk of getting COVID are first in line. The Prime Minister says that's most likely to start next Saturday.
Our first priority is our border workers, our first line of defence, who interact with returnees who may potentially have the virus every day. We expect to vaccinate these approximately 12,000 workers within a 2 to 3 week time frame.
The Pfizer vaccine requires 2 jabs given 3 weeks apart. COVID Minister Chris Hipkins says 226,000 of the 2-dose courses are due to arrive by the end of the first quarter of the year, but the first batch will be in the low tens of thousands.
We're likely to get a near weekly delivery, and our first quarter shipments will be split over those deliveries.
The Waitemata DHB revealed details of a provisional plan for the northern region at a meeting this week. It showed those in the Jet Park quarantine facility getting vaccinated in week 1, followed by the Port, Marsden Point and the first managed isolation workers in week 2, then airport workers in week 3. MIQ nurses are some of the most at risk, doing COVID swabs every day on new arrivals, some of whom end up positive. The Nurses Society Director, David Wills, says it's been a stressful year, especially because some nurses have caught the virus.
Having a vaccine is certainly very welcome, and we expect the uptake to be essentially 100%.
He says they'll be even more relieved once their families are protected too, because it's not yet known whether the vaccine stops transmission of COVID or just protects those who have it.
It won't remove the need for all of the other infection control measures that people are still having to take when they're working there, or the implications for their off-duty time.
Epidemiologist Michael Baker says the vaccine will help build a defensive wall around New Zealand as it protects those most at risk, and it's likely it will, at the very least, reduce transmission.
This is an absolute landmark event for New Zealand, that we're going to finally get a vaccine that we know is very effective and very safe.
The Immunisation Advisory Centre is in charge of the training. Its manager, Loretta Roberts, says there are about 7,000 authorised vaccinators, and some of those are now getting extra training in a 2-hour online module.
The training is being focused on those vaccinators who are going to give the Pfizer vaccine. So we're looking at training about 400 to 500 of our already pool of vaccinators.
One of the quirks of the vaccine is that it must be stored at minus 70 degrees and it will be transported around the country in special freezers. Ms Roberts says vaccinators are learning how that will work once it arrives at their door.
So once you take it out of the freezer and thaw it, you've actually got that vaccine available to use for up to 5 days. But we will continue to keep that in a refrigerator. So like normal vaccines, we keep them between 2 and 8 degrees.
Because the first rollout will be small, the logistical challenge is not expected to be too tricky. But more vaccinators are being recruited to help for the huge operation when the rest of the population, those with no major risk factors, get their chance to get a jab in what's expected to be the second half of the year. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Meanwhile, across the Tasman, Australian scientists hope to be rolling out 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine every week from mid-March, including what could be more than 7 million doses ordered by New Zealand. The Melbourne-based biotech drug company CSL is in its final manufacturing stage, with the first batch set for harvest on Monday. And as World Watch's Max Toll reports, as Melbourne goes into its third lockdown tonight, it could spell the end of the pandemic in Australia.
A photo op in northern Melbourne, but this time it was one Australians were stoked to see. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison toured CSL's Parkvale factory today, hosted by the drug company's general manager Stephen Marlowe.
We're marking the announcement of going into the final stages of vaccine production next week. Australian-made vaccine, and not for all Australians, and we're really proud at CSL to be making such a strong contribution to the nation's health, so we're very proud.
A scientist at CSL, Stephen Jacoby, says he's been working long hours, 7 days a week, to get to this stage.
The staff here, they're waiting for that day. They've put in their heart and soul into this, and they're hoping that the Australian public takes it on and gets vaccinated. Well, I've got 2 young children, and they think I'm some kind of superhero. So they say, "Oh, Daddy's saving Australia."
Subject to approval by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, it's hoped from late March about 1 million doses will be taken each week from CSL's factory and distributed across Australia. They've been months in the making. Last year, CSL and the pharmaceutical firm AstraZeneca struck a deal for the vaccine to be produced in Melbourne. New Zealand is expecting to source more than 7 million of these vaccines. The Australian government will spend hundreds of millions of dollars securing doses for people, with the first vaccine set to be bottled in vials from Monday.
Our vaccination program and strategy is on track, and that's confirmed again by the visit that the Minister for Health and I have made here today.
Scott Morrison was criticised last year for striking vaccine deals before health and safety sign-offs had been given, but today he was in full-blown brag mode.
We're doing it here, in Australia, right here in Melbourne. And that is something that few Prime Ministers and Presidents around the world can say, because we are one of a handful of countries that made the decision to be able to ensure we had this capability here in Australia by Australians.
A concern looming over Australia's vaccine rollout is whether new strains of the coronavirus will diminish the effectiveness of the jab. Both the UK and South African variants have been detected in the country, but CSL scientists say they are confident the AstraZeneca vaccine can be tweaked and improved if needed. For Checkpoint, this is Max Toll.
The Cancer Control Agency has kicked off a series of nationwide hui in New Plymouth today, designed to address the appalling cancer statistics for Maori in New Zealand. Around 200 people turned out to hear from health practitioners and cancer survivors. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin went along.
The cancer statistics for Maori make stark reading. Maori are 20% more likely to develop cancer and twice as likely as non-Maori to die from it. The Cancer Control Agency, Te Aho o Te Kahu, which was set up in 2019, has acknowledged the health system simply works better for non-Maori than Maori. Its Director for Person Whānau-Centred Care, Fletcher Beasley, says the hui are the first step in turning those figures around.
Too many Māori die of cancer every year. Too many Māori get cancer. It's a big problem for our country as a whole. And these hui are a way for us to hear the voice of whānau Māori, work together with stakeholders across the continuum of care, in our hospital, in our hauora, in our iwi, to come together to listen to whānau, hear their experiences of cancer and design solutions for the future.
Mr Beasley understands scepticism about another government agency making promises about Maori cancer rates. But he says Te Ahu o Te Kahu is different.
Te Ahu o Te Kahu is not just non-Māori staff, we have Māori staff. We also have haere Moai, our Māori cancer leadership nationwide, supporting us. We have Tumu Whakarai, our GM Māori, across the country supporting us, and we're making an effort. So it's like, I can't speak for the past, but definitely for the future, I think that 15 hui across the country is a good start.
Mohuia Goza is a board member at Hei Ahuru Moawai, which has the objective of reducing cancer inequalities by influencing decision-making and policy settings. She says simple changes could improve bowel and cervical cancer outcomes for Maori.
Government needs to commit to extending that bowel cancer screening age for Māori, needs to fund the HPV self-test program, needs to essentially design an equitable screening program that has Māori govern it. And that way we can absolutely ensure that we don't have more screening programs that are inequitably designed that privilege non-Māori.
Moehuia Goza says the hui are a good first step. Rawiri Dorba is Pou Hapai at the Taranaki District Health Board. He says cancer has become commonplace for Māori whānau.
We lose a lot of whānau every year to cancer. It's so terrible that it's almost become a normal news to us. One of the Kazis has passed away of cancer. One of the Kazis has got cancer. And I guess for us, the statistics are so high, it's huge and it's terrible.
Mr Dorba says it's easy to point the finger at institutional racism and failed policy settings of the past, but he prefers to focus on the future.
It's a huge day for our families to be able to come together on a more positive occasion. I mean, as negative as the whole issue around cancer is, a day like today where we come together and talk about it as a focused kaupapa is really positive.
Breast cancer survivor Wharikuka Tonga Awhiko shared her story. After getting a scan in a community bus, she believes the intervention of a surgeon who was treating her husband was crucial to her successful treatment. Ms Tonga Awhiko says communication was haphazard.
It was really quite scary, the not knowing how long things were going to take, what sort of cancer I had, because I didn't know how fast. All I knew at the beginning when they found the lump, it was 3 millimetres. By the time I had my operation, it was well on its way to doing its thing, and it was 14. So 22 days later, that's how big it had grown from the time they found it.
While appreciative of the care she received, she says simple things like getting her name right seemed difficult.
There wasn't anything Māori for me that I could relate with. I mean, going to oncology and people not knowing how to pronounce my name and rather call me my middle name than my full name. Wharikuka, they're calling me Margaret, that sort of thing. So the language thing for me was a bit of a barrier because I speak te reo. Yeah, there weren't a lot of things teed up for Māori.
Ms Tonga Awhiko hopes hui like today's will make interacting with the health system easier for Māori. It's planned the remaining 14 community meetings will wrap up by the end of July. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Robin Martin hau.
It's 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A Crown witness says physical and sexual abuse, drug taking and visits from patched gang members were common at a former SIFS home run by a man now on trial for the abuse of 6 teenage boys. Earl Opataia is on trial in the High Court in Auckland, now facing 27 charges, including sexual violation, after 6 charges were dropped earlier today. The witness told the court he was just a kid at the time of the alleged offending and says Mr Opataia told him he'd go to jail if he didn't follow orders. Jordan Bond reports.
Earl Opataia ran an Auckland child, youth and family home for boys in the early to mid-2000s, caring for about 150 boys over a 5-year period. He was a boxer and got some of the boys involved in the sport. 6 boys claim he sexually abused them during this time. One, 14 years old at the time and now a grown man, gave evidence today. He can't be identified. In his police interview, he described the physical and sexual abuse as so common it was considered by the boys at the house as a normal thing. and they talked about who was going to be the next to be molested. His words have been revoiced.
He told me to get the f*** in the room or go to a place worse than where I was. I was just a little kid. I didn't know. He said if I didn't do what he wanted me to do, I'd go to jail. I just did what he said. I didn't have anywhere else to go, and he knew that.
The man said the abuse started 2 days after he arrived at the house, and he spent less than 2 months there. His descriptions of the physical and sexual abuse are too graphic to report. The man said he threatened to call the cops on Mr. Opataia, but that only made it worse.
I was in no way liking this. I wanted to kill him. But I'm just a young kid. It became normal. He kept on bashing me, and he said he was going to kill my mother and my sister.
The man said Mr. Opataia bought the boys fast food and gave them cannabis, and on one occasion gave him methamphetamine.
He gave me a puff. That was the first time I smoked pee. It was mainly just dope. He gave me dope when I left his room. He gave me a joint while I was in his room. It was pretty much to f*** us up.
He agreed drugs were given in exchange for sex. He told the court he was scared and didn't know what to do, and buried all of this years ago, and it made him angry to talk about. He called Mr. Opataia sick a number of times in the interview.
I was old enough to know and understand that this was wrong, but I didn't want to go somewhere worse than that. He's a gang member. I didn't want to piss him off. Plus, he's a boxer.
Earl Opataia had 6 of his charges dismissed today after the Crown said it would not offer any evidence for the charges. He denies all remaining 27 charges, including sexual violation, indecency with boys between 12 and 16, drug supply and threatening to kill. His defence lawyer Anushka Bloom said all the boys' claims were fabricated, made up so they could be compensated for being abused in state care. She said there were numerous success stories from boys during Mr. Opataia's time running the home, which contrasted sharply with the complaints, because the complaints were simply not true. The trial continues before a jury and Justice Gold. For Checkpoint from the High Court in Auckland, Jordan Bond.
The government will spend $55 million over the next 3 years to foster public interest journalism. Excuse me. The Minister for Broadcasting and Media, Chris Hipkins, announced the contestable fund in Dunedin today. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown was there and has this report.
The government says the funding will prop up public interest journalism which otherwise is at risk or would not be produced. The Minister for Broadcasting and Media, Chris Hipkins, chose the headquarters of Allied Press, publishers of New Zealand's oldest daily newspaper, the Otago Daily Times, to announce the fund. He says the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated both the struggles facing the media industry as well as its importance for informing the public.
There is a cruel paradox that won't escape anyone in this room, that at a time when the media sector was struggling to stay afloat, New Zealanders were relying on you more than ever to stay informed and safe through the pandemic and the lockdown last year.
Chris Hipkins says the government is making $10 million available in the current financial year, increasing to $25 million in 2021-22 and $20 million in the year following that. The money is coming from the COVID Relief Fund. He pushed back against suggestions the fund has come too late, with many companies having already made layoffs.
Actually, I would argue that if we were looking at the situation for media about 10 months ago, it was pretty dire. I think things have come back better than we had hoped. And I think we were watching that situation very carefully. It has taken time. There were some issues in the last Parliament about being able to get this funding out, but we're happy that we made the manifesto commitment at election and we were able to do this.
Allied Press's Chief Executive Grant McKenzie says last year's government funding to support the media industry through the pandemic was disproportionately skewed towards broadcasters, and he hopes this funding will better support print media.
We want to make sure that print media gets a fair share of the market, as we have the most journalists out there, and want to make sure that we're getting that local coverage that we at the ODT have continued to do and will continue to do.
Associate Professor of Media and Communications at Victoria University of Wellington, Peter Thompson, says funding for the industry is sorely needed.
I think this new funding scheme is extremely welcome. Obviously, public interest journalism is a vital part of our democracy, so it's very good to see that the government has recognised its importance and made this commitment of $55 million.
However, he says it's a stopgap measure for an industry which has been hemorrhaging revenue.
It is only for a 3-year period, And $55 million over those 3 years is a significant investment in one sense. But it's also much less than the overall loss of revenue that the news media sector has seen over the past 20 years.
Further details on the fund will be made available in late March, with applications opening around the end of April. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
In the US, the Biden administration has bought a further 200 million coronavirus vaccine doses. The president continues to slam the former administration for misleading and hiding details about America's preparedness for a mass vaccination program. Meanwhile, he continues to watch Donald Trump's impeachment trial from a distance. CNN's Caitlin Collins has more.
President Biden predicting the grim new footage from his predecessor's impeachment trial could alter Republicans' opinions about whether to convict him.
I think the Senate has a very important job to complete, and I think my guess is some minds may have been changed, but I don't know.
You think conviction is possible, Mr. President?
The president didn't answer that question, but a top aide said he was deeply affected by what he saw.
The footage was just a reminder of how shocked and saddened he was on the day this occurred. It was kind of a reliving of that for many people who has spent as much time as he has in Congress.
Biden and his aides have insisted he isn't paying close attention to the trial and is instead focused on the pandemic. At the National Institutes of Health today, Biden announced they've purchased an additional 200 million doses of vaccine, which could be ready later this year.
Just this afternoon, we signed the final contracts for 100 million more Moderna and 100 million more Pfizer vaccines. We're now on track to have enough supply for 300 million Americans by the end of July.
Democrats are vowing the trial won't slow down his agenda.
No, it is not slowing us down. When I first became majority leader, they said, you have three big tasks: President's cabinet, impeachment, COVID. We are on track with all three.
Meanwhile, the White House is facing criticism for adding fine print to this promise from the campaign trail.
We'll also do everything we can to keep our educators and students safe, to safely reopen a majority of our K through 8 schools by the end of the first 100 days.
And that report was from Caitlin Collins in Washington. A quick bit of your feedback here. Sharon's got in touch and says, urgent please, will cleaners be included in receiving the first round of COVID vaccine? If you go to the Ministry of Health website, the vaccination strategy is there. Under the subject, when vaccinations will start, says 20th of February. Who will the first groups be? Cleaners, nurses who do MIQ health checks, security staff, customs and border officials, airline staff and hotel workers. Will then vaccinate the people they live with to reduce the risk of them getting COVID-19, says the information posted on the Ministry of Health's website. It's called COVID-19 Getting a Vaccine. Look it up. All the details are there. Some of you asking about water testing. The annual report, again, on the Ministry of Health website. Annual report on drinking water quality 2018-2019. And yes, it's the latest. See you next week.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Victorian government says a 5-day snap lockdown is prompted by the danger posed by the more infectious UK variant in a new cluster. The COVID response minister admits it will require a degree of planning to roll out the first Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine in the next few weeks to 12,000 MIQ and border workers. The Democrats have finished presenting their impeachment case against Donald Trump. His lawyers will respond tomorrow. A 4.9 magnitude earthquake has hit Taranaki, centred 60 kilometres southwest of Waverley, at a depth of 120 kilometres. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
We were stepping slightly out of our comfort zone and supporting a 5% rates increase last year. We haven't had an opportunity, of course, to discuss